Wake up. It's the Sleep Unplugged podcast, episode 138, The Subtle Art of Hurkle-Durkle. Swim in a deep sea of blankets. Welcome, everyone, to the Sleep Unplugged podcast. My name is Chris Winter. I'm a neurologist and sleep specialist and your host for this episode of the podcast. If you're new to the Sleep Unplugged podcast, welcome. If you're a veteran, welcome back. I think this podcast is best enjoyed while lying in bed. So if you're out walking your dog, commuting to work, you can listen to the podcast, but I think this one might pair best with lying in bed, and we'll talk all about it in just a second. Very excited for the episode of this podcast, which was actually, my wife sent me an article from the Washington Post. So this podcast episode does have some required reading, or if you want more information, there are two great articles that I will recommend for you. Andrea Sachs wrote an article for Washington Post called "A Guide to Hurkle-Durkling: Scotland's Proud Tradition of Lazing in Bed." There's also another one in New York Times, "How to Stay in Bed Too Long, Asking for a Friend" by Elizabeth Passarella. So just quick notes of those if you need a little bit more information about today's topic. Today's podcast, if you want to get in touch with the podcast, tell me about your stories of Hurkle-Durkling and lounging in bed, you can do it. You can always reach the podcast through social media. Dr. Chris Winter Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter Twitter, Dr. Chris Winter Threads, Bluesky. It's pretty much all Dr. Chris Winter. There is a YouTube page, and if you're watching the YouTube video of this episode, you can see I'm experiencing as much of the full Hurkle-Durkle as I can. I've got my duvet wrapped around me. I'm wearing my Lunya silk pajamas. I've got my Trader Joe's coffee, which is my favorite coffee. I've even got a book. I've been reading a book recently called A Most Sweet Sleep, a compendium of 19th century perspectives on sleep, rest, and dreams. This was actually compiled by the Museum of Sleep, and I invite you to check them out. You can look up Museums of Sleep on Instagram. They are located, I believe, in Richmond, Virginia. A really great group trying to get something together and put together a Museum of Sleep. I think it would be a fascinating place to visit. So before we get going with this episode, comments, corrections, criticisms, we don't have a sponsor for this week's podcast episode. I'll read a couple. One was from Kathy, who wrote, "I saw them on SNL a long time ago." She's referring to World Party, which was our musical group from last week's episode on insomnia and vagal nerve stimulators. Kathy, I saw World Party on SNL too and was blown away. They did a song from Goodbye Jumbo, which was the song, the album we were talking about last week. Way Down Now was the song that they did. But they also did their second song, I remember, was off of their first album, Private Revolution, called Ship of Fools. And how many different songs, how many artists have recorded a song called Ship of Fools? It is a completely different song. Robert Plant did one. And anyway, and I remember going out, buying their album, excitedly getting home, listening to it, being really disappointed that Ship of Fools wasn't on there, and had to go back and find out that Private Revolution was the first album. I had to buy that one too, and it's awesome. So I was not disappointed. Well, thank you, Kathy. I'm glad you like that and listened to World Party too. Kate wrote a quick message to us from our YouTube page about our Catathrenia episode, which has eclipsed 13,000 views on YouTube, and it literally is its own community right now. Like, they don't care about the Sleep Unplugged podcast. Don't really care too much about Chris Winter, but Chris Winter put on a Catathrenia video, and it's this message board of people sharing ideas and thoughts and woes and struggles with Catathrenia. She wrote, "I noticed this when I was in university, being very tired in lectures. I agree with parasomnia since I'm usually between sleep and wakefulness, more continuous when I'm stressed, overtired, or sick." Well, thanks, Kate. I appreciate you letting us know that. Real quick before we dive into this week's musical reference, just wanted to mention the upcoming Pillow Fight episode, March 16th. It's the same day as Selection Sunday, NCAA March Madness. We have pillows squaring off in a battle that is going to be far more riveting than the NCAA tournament, maybe slightly less riveting than uh, Network. What was that? Tournament of Champions on Food Network with Guy Fieri, which I love. So much fun. But anyway, we'll try to strike a balance of excitement between those two things. We've already got our wonderful pillow sponsors line, or people who've donated pillows: Bed Gear, Casper, Coop, Dozy Boy, Lagoon, Layla, Marlowe, Nest, Pillow Cube, Pluto, Sleepies, Twilight, just to mention a few. Really excited that so many pillow groups and pillow manufacturers are interested in doing this. I think it's going to be so much fun, and I can't wait to see who emerges victorious from the pillow fight. And there is a printable bracket if you want to fill in your guesses. Once we get some seedings done, we'll get those out there. So this week's musical reference, "Swim in a Deep Sea of Blankets," is from John Mayer's song "Your Body is a Wonderland," which was a single off of his debut studio album Room for Strangers back in 2001. Love this album. It was critically praised, pretty much universally. My favorite song on the album was "Why Georgia." I think it's just such a beautiful song. And John Mayer is a very interesting guy. You know, he just became obsessed with the guitar in his early teens. His parents got him a guitar, and literally it was sort of the confluence of getting a guitar and somebody giving him a Stevie Ray Vaughan album, apparently. And we talked about Stevie Ray Vaughan back with the episode 135 and Sleep and Blood Sugar. You know, of course, he was the legendary guitarist, died too young, played on Let's Dance with David Bowie. So these things converge in John's life, and he becomes obsessed with the guitar to the point where his parents took him to a psychiatrist twice because they felt like he was just spending way too much time on the guitar. I had a great opportunity to converse with John a couple years ago, and he's just a super guy, very interested in sleep, kindest guy. Kept saying, "Please come out to one of my concerts," and you know, it's just something I often just don't have time to do. But at one point, he said, "Look, we're going to be in your area with Dead and Company. Please come see us." And I said, "Well, I really can't, but I've got a son who lives very close by." And of course, he sent my son and his friends tickets and passes and all kinds of great stuff. I mean, just the nicest guy. And my sons are both obsessed with him because he loves cool watches, which I don't get. I mean, I do get, actually. I think cool watches are good. I just don't know a lot about them. So my sons are always disappointed when they want to talk about watches, and I'm just sort of ignorant about the whole thing. My favorite quotation that I found about "Body is a Wonderland," and my second choice for the lyric for this album, for this episode of the podcast, was from the old 97s, which I've already featured in a previous episode. There was a song called 19 they did, and there was a line in it: all I really want to do is lie around in bed with you. I thought that would have been perfect for the episode too. But anyway, "Body is a Wonderland," speculation that John Mayer wrote it about Jennifer Love Hewitt, who he dated at some point. And I love this interview because Jennifer Love Hewitt was asked about this, and she said, "No, there's no way this was written about me." And this is her quotation: "My body is far from a wonderland. My body is more like a pawn shop. There's a lot of interesting things put together, and if you look closely, you'd probably be excited. But at first glance, not so much." I think that's really funny. So we'll put "Body is a Wonderland" on the Spotify music playlist. And John Mayer, we salute you. Oh, by the way, it was interesting. I went to medical school at Emory in Atlanta, Georgia. I lived in Decatur, Georgia. If you look it up, you can find Claremont Condos right there on the corner of Claremont and I can't remember the other name of that road right there. But anyway, you'll see it. And from there, there's a place in Decatur called Eddie's Attic. It's about a mile and a half away from where we live. So we would go there a lot, listen to live music. I had a buddy, Matt Trowbridge. If you look him up, he's a big doctor and does all kinds of cool stuff with architecture. He was an amazing singer and guitarist. And so we'd go out and listen to him and other groups. And when I was talking to John, I mentioned that I lived in Decatur up until I graduated from medical school in 99. He said, "Oh my God, I used to play right there in Decatur at Eddie's Attic. And I swear to God, I think I remember him," which is crazy that there he was and he would be this famous person, but he was playing at Eddie's Attic. So anyway, we have that in common. So let's talk about Hurkle-Durkle. You're talking about Hurkle-Durkle. You wrapped up in a duvet. You've got coffee, which I will take a quick sip. You're wearing your pajamas. Again, these Lunya pajamas are outstanding. They're not sponsoring this episode. I'm just telling you, as a friend, you might want to invest in them. Hey, oh, Valentine's Day is coming up. There you go. I've solved your problem what to get your partner. So Hurkle-Durkle is this idea of lounging around in bed when you should be up. And I love this. You know what I love about sleep? I love sleep because we'll tell you one thing. Listen, you got to get up and get going. You can't spend time in bed. And then we'll turn around and say, but you could hurkle-durkle. So hurkle-durkle is a Scottish term, apparently. So I was looking at that article by Andrea Sachs, and she looked it up, and apparently it is a Scottish term for to lie in bed or lounge about when one should be up. And I love that idea. And I love exploring the idea of what it means to be in bed, you know. And this sort of stands in contrast with recent research that I found. I did not look up the source, and that's a mistake on my part. But there was a researcher, and he posted online sort of all the things we talked. Remember that episode we did, episode 100, where I said, here's 100 things you can do to improve your sleep. And if you listen to me, you probably are thinking, oh, yeah, number 38 is probably really important. But number 59 doesn't seem that. So basically, he looked at all the different things we talk about when it comes to making our sleep better and ranked them based upon relative evidence. In fact, I was just talking to a guy recently who is developing AI software that does that for you, that kind of goes out there and scours research to let you know when I tell you, hey, exercise is really good for your sleep. And then I tell you, hey, wearing a sleeping mask is really good for your sleep. And then I tell you, hey, getting up at the same time every morning is good for your sleep. This program will actually tell you, well, yeah, but the evidence is pretty thin. Hey, vagal nerve stimulators are amazing for your sleep. Oh, by the way, this is crazy. So last week we did vagal nerve stimulators. I told you a bunch of different brands. Literally 3 days later, and I think completely unbeknownst to this company, Truvaga reached out, or a person representing them, and said, hey, would you be interested in trying Truvaga? So I wrote this person back and said, absolutely. I would love to do that. In fact, I just did a podcast episode about it. And she said, great. What media outlet do you represent? So clearly this was sort of a blast out to people, probably like at Wirecutter and things of that nature that have, massive New York Times platforms. And somehow I got on her list. And so I just wrote back, in all seriousness, it just wrote the Sleep Unplugged podcast. So I will let you listeners know if I receive a vagal nerve stimulator, and we'll give it a try. In fact, to be blunt, comments, corrections, criticisms, I got a lot of listener feedback about their experience with vagal nerve stimulators. And I didn't want to pile on. I was actually hoping for somebody to write me and say, hey, I've had one for several years now. It's been a real game changer. I didn't receive that, but just because I didn't receive it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So there were several people who had expressed a little frustration with their experience on it, kind of in parallel to what we were talking about. Again, I think this is much more of a sleep improvement than a sleep solution. But anyway, so going back to what we're talking about. So that AI platform does all the research for you. And so here we are, bed, what does that research say? That study I found that I couldn't find the reference, what did it say? What it said was that of all the different things we talk about with people in terms of what can really make a big impact on their sleep quality, I would have guessed exercise was number one. This researcher said exercise, I think, was number two. Number one was consistent wake-up time. Isn't that fascinating? Here we are back again to that chrono sort of variable of timing of sleep being so important. And again, we talked about that with the cancer episode we did, episode 136, that whole thing of shift work being a carcinogen kind of falls into that. And his research said the same thing. So here we are talking about the timing of sleep, getting out of bed at the same time every day, that light exposure, body movement, social interaction, temperature changes, being a real positive factor when it comes to your sleep. And I believe that it is. So when we think about Hurkle-Durkle, I think we're talking about something that is exceptional. In fact, when I was looking at what makes Hurkle-Durkle or the act of Hurkle-Durkling, one of the things that kind of came up in my research was that it's often associated with a vacation. In fact, there are some resorts and hotels that are kind of leaning into the Hurkle-Durkle, where you go there and they give you special pajamas, a selection of books to choose from, and they'll send it to your room. You get tea service. Sometimes Hurkle-Durkle is associated with a little bit of alcohol, just a little fun little drink or something like that, or drinks that you have while you're in bed, food while you're in bed. So I think a lot of hospitality people are leaning into this. I've got a good friend of my wife's who's big time into high up hospitality. And next time I see her, I'm going to ask her what her thoughts are on Hurkle-Durkling from a travel and leisure perspective. That'd be really interesting. So for some people, the Hurkle-Durkle needs to be associated with vacation, meaning that some random Saturday when you got a whole lot to do and you stay in bed longer, that's not necessarily Hurkle-Durkling. I just recently, right after the holidays, and all my family was home, and it was great, and a little time off of work. My wife now has a very big job with a museum. We decided that let's take just a couple, 3 or 4 days. I think it was 4 days, and we went off to a resort in Mexico and just Hurkle-Durkled our asses off, if that is possible. If anybody could injure themselves Hurkle-Durkling, I might have come close to doing it. In fact, at one point during that vacation, we were sitting under this little cabana, looking out on the Gulf. It was really pretty, and this resort. Look it up. It's called The Edition. It's right outside of, like, between Tulum and Playa del Carmen. There was The Edition, and what was the other place right next to it? The Saint Lucia or something like that. And they were built within the last couple years. The Edition. Am I remembering that right? Yeah, Edition was, I think, built to represent Earth, and then the Saint Lucia or the Saint something was built to represent heaven. I mean, they were amazing places. Listen, look them up. They're Marriott properties, I believe. And if you need a little getaway, I cannot recommend it more. And we got put in a room that had its own little private swimming pool, and I'll post some pictures on social media. It was awesome. But at one point, I was sitting there reading a book. And I did it. I did the full Hurkle-Durkle. I was reading Insomniac City, Insomnia City, either Insomnia City or Insomniac City. I can't remember. It was about a guy who was a writer who had a relationship with the neurologist and author Oliver Sacks. It was a really interesting book. And I looked over at my wife at one point and said, "I don't think I've ever done so little for so long." And I can't say it was entirely comfortable. People, I've had people worry about me, like, "Chris, relax. You got to take it easy. Your body is going to give out on you if you don't just take some time to recharge every now and then." And I believe that. So Hurkle-Durkle probably associated with vacation, but I think it's more about being intentional about it. It's like, hey, how would you feel about next month, maybe on Valentine's Day, we do a little Hurkle-Durkle on that Sunday? I mean, I think you kind of plan it out. We'll open our Valentine's presents in bed and have breakfast in bed and read in bed and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, number two, I think Hurkle-Durkle seems to have a bit of a cutoff. And if you said, "Chris, isn't Hurkle-Durkling just bed rotting?" I think the cutoff is really what makes the two things different. Hurkle-Durkle is, we're going to spend some intentional time this morning in bed together, not getting up right away, stay in our pajamas, maybe eat in bed, read in bed. And one of the things that was nice about the Mexico vacation is we have dogs, two little dogs that are wonderful, but they are attention hogs. They love to relax, but they want to relax right up against you. So it's this sort of canine intimacy barrier, if you will. You can kind of hold hands over top of them, but they want your attention. So it's nice sometimes to get away from them and actually be able to have some proximity to your partner. Sometimes it's great. So the cutoff, I think, is really important, meaning we Hurkle-Durkled in Mexico, but we didn't eat lunch in bed. Like, we got up and went to the pool, went to the beach, went into Playa for one day and just kind of bummed around and got kind of overwhelmed by the tourists and left. So I think there's a cutoff with Hurkle-Durkling that bed rotting seems like it's kind of like the stay in bed bender. You're just there all day long and there's plates and stuff because you're eating all your meals there. I think bed rotting, as the term would imply, has a little bit more of a negative connotation. And the last thing, again, the third thing, so often is intentional. There is a time cutoff. I think that there's also sort of a planning of that event to be a bit more meaningful. Like, my daughter got that book for me in Insomniac City. She got it for me for Christmas. So I was kind of intentional about bringing that book with me and intending to read it. A book not dealing with sleep science necessarily, something I don't get to do a whole lot. So having that intention of reading the book, reconnecting with a partner, relaxing and unplugging from your electronics, although there is some debate as to whether or not you can check your email with Hurkle-Durkling. I think when I think of bed rotting, I think you got up, you never left the bed, and you're just kind of doom scrolling through Instagram videos and getting upset with Facebook posts about political kinds of things that you disagree with. To me, there is a when you're done bed rotting, I think there's a very good chance that you look back at that and think, ugh, really wasted that time. I think when you're done Hurkle-Durkling, it was an experience. Like, you were happy that you did it. You got the book read. You really enjoyed the tea. You enjoyed this hospitality service that the hotel provided you. I think that's really nice. And the thing that I really want to think about when it comes to Hurkle-Durkling, and this is not an Insomnia Monday, but the thing that I would think about would be, can we learn something from Hurkle-Durkling in terms of allowing ourselves to de-stress the morning sometimes? When I think about a morning, it's alarm goes off and it's on. Refill patient prescriptions, get ready for the day. Somebody asked me to come out and do a lecture on a day where I've got an entire slate of patients scheduled, so I need to start moving those people around and communicate. Like, it's on. There's a lot of days where it's lunchtime and I've not had a chance between walking dogs and feeding dogs to really feed myself or even get myself a cup of coffee made, because that's kind of a process. Grind the beans and you pull the shot and you steam the milk and add the collagen, whatever. So I like the idea of easing into a day where it's not just like this starter pistol goes off and you're going into the day. To me, the biggest thing about Hurkle-Durkling, when I read about it or talk to people about it or they ask questions about it, what I like about Hurkle-Durkling is that we are creating positive associations with our bed. That's what it's all about, right? And I've talked, it's no secret that I've talked about the piece of sleep advice. One of the pieces of sleep advice that I hate, I really dislike is, and it's common within cognitive behavioral therapy, if you're in bed and you can't fall asleep, get up and go do something if it takes you more than 15 minutes to fall asleep. That's usually the sentiment. And what sometimes I'm successful, sometimes not successful in explaining to patients or even other providers is that there's an element of that advice that makes the bed seem bad, or at least makes it seem like you're developing a bad association with the bed. So before that can happen, get the hell out of the bedroom, right? Go form the bad association with the living room or the other room. Don't bring the bad association into the bedroom. And I get that. And that's real. But I always think that there should be a little bit more to that piece of advice, which should be something on the order of get in bed. And if you don't fall asleep right away and it's upsetting to you and you don't like being in bed, not sleeping, then sure, get out and forget the 15 minutes. If you're reaching that point in 5 minutes, get out. The deeper explanation to me might really be explained with Hurkle-Durkling. If getting up in the morning being in your pajamas and in bed, sipping tea, reading a book, being next to your partner is negative, then I would say, I guess, don't do it. Forget about the scheduling and the chrono, variable here with sleep. If you don't like it, don't do it. If you don't like cold plunges, then I guess don't do them. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're not here to force you to do anything negative. But if you're saying, oh, no, 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 Chris, that Hurkle-Durkle situation sounds delightful. Okay. So we've come to an agreement that you can be in bed, not sleeping, and not only be neutral about it, but be kind of excited about it. Like you're paying for that experience at the hotel that has the Hurkle-Durkle package, right? Stare out at some beautiful loch at the Isle of Skye and sip Scottish tea and wear our little, tweed pajamas. I don't know, I'm making this up. Like, so we've agreed that being in bed can be positive, if not awesome, right? And I think we have to lean into that. So why is the same bed, the same comforter, the same pajamas a negative when it's 11:30 p.m. and you went to bed at 11 and you're still awake? What's the difference? You can turn on a light and read if you want to. You could sip some chamomile tea. Like, I was talking about this the other day on a podcast, and I brought up Superman's Fortress of Solitude. And I said, to me, when I'm in bed, awake, but not sleeping, particularly at night, I can't say I do a lot of Hurkle-Durkling, but at night, that's how I would describe the feeling to somebody else. Like if somebody said, Chris, if you go to bed and you don't fall asleep right away, what's going through your mind? It's Superman's Fortress of Solitude. If you remember, in the Superman movie, he flies to some Arctic place, and the Fortress of Solitude is like all these ice crystals, and he's got all this interesting Superman technology there, and he puts little things in tubes, and it's kind of like this weird computer, and it's where he goes when Lois is being extra and there's a lot going on in his life, and he just needs some time to be alone, think about his parents and the exploded planet and the criminals that he's locked into little space things and sent out into space. Like Superman needs some time by himself. And while I am no Superman, I feel the same way. And so it kind of goes back to the comment of, I can't remember the last time I've done nothing for so long. That Fortress of Solitude at night is my time to do nothing. I'm going to coin a new phrase, and the new phrase is Hurkle-Durkling. Hurkle-Durkling is when you do Hurkle-Durkling, but it's at night after you go to bed, not in the morning after you wake up. So the Hurkle is something I actually get really excited about. Everybody's asleep, or trying to get there. It's dark, dogs are asleep. When the kids were in the house, kids were asleep. And now I've got nothing to do besides think about stuff and relax and ponder certain things or make certain plans and just be alone with my thoughts. I love it. I absolutely love it. It's really a positive for me. Now, it may not be for you. And that's something we talk a lot about in my clinic. Why is it not a positive for you? I just had a patient this week who said something on the order of, the being in bed, not sleeping is when negative thoughts start to creep in my head. I can block them out very easily during the day. I get that. I think that's very common. I also think there's a control issue there. I control things during the day, and goddamn, I can't control when I fall asleep at night. I get that too. For me, I think there is a sense of hiding a little bit. Like when I'm in bed, awake, not sleeping, I'm hiding from the emails, hiding from all the things that I've got to get done, paperwork, getting, tax forms together, that thing I want to do in the garden. I got to pull all that stuff up and re-sod and do all that stuff. So I need to go get mulch and some stuff. Like, I don't have to do anything. I can just be. And I think that's what we want to think about with Hurkle-Durkling is it's okay to just be. Now, again, we want to be very careful that yes, waking up at the same time every day can be very helpful to your sleep, especially if you're somebody who struggles to fall asleep at night. Spending a whole lot of time in bed is not going to help your insomnia situation. But if you're somebody who's not struggling with that, don't fear a little vacation few hours that you spend awake in bed in the morning. I think it can be absolutely delightful. And for those of you who do struggle with sleep, using that technique to build or maybe rebuild a positive association with how you feel being in bed awake, I think can be nothing short of fantastic. So that's it. Hurkle-Durkle, done and dusted. If you have Hurkle-Durkling stories or great places to go to Hurkle-Durkle, please let us know. Dr. Chris Winter Twitter, Dr. Chris Winter Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter Bluesky threads. Check out the YouTube page. We will post a little John Mayer on our Spotify music playlist. Get ready for the March 16th pillow fight sponsored by Sleep Unplugged podcast. And until next week, sleep well.